AYF London is named after the Khanasor Expedition, which took place in the year 1897. This year, we are presenting a three-part series in commemoration of this heroic event. This is part 1. Let's look at the events leading up to the expedition. The Khansor Expedition took place following the Hamidian Massacres between 1894 and 1896 and the defence of Van. The Hamidian Massacres took place in the context of a crumbling Ottoman Empire where ethnic minorities demanded civil reform and an end to their second-class status. The Armenians were prominent in making such demands, being one of the largest ethnic groups across historic Armenia and eastern Anatolia, and holding prominent positions in large cities. The massacres are named after the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who publicly held the Armenians in disdain. Upon learning that the Armenians had approached European states in order to gain support for civil reform, he stated, "Such great treachery towards religion and state, may they be cursed upon by God." The massacres were carried out by irregular cavalry regiments who were known as the Hamidiyya, and mostly consisted of Kurdish tribesmen organised to protect the eastern border. Instead, they were directed to attack the Armenian population, unaware that they would also suffer a similar fate at the hands of the Turkish authorities decades later. The massacres were particularly brutal. William Sackleben, an American journalist, horrifically recalled for the Times newspaper, "Along the wall lay 321 dead bodies of the massacred Armenians. Many were fearfully mangled and mutilated. I saw one with his face completely smashed in with a blow of some heavy weapon after he was killed. I saw some with their own necks almost severed by a sword cut. One I saw, whose whole chest had been skinned. His forearms were cut off, while the upper arm was skinned of flesh. I asked if the dogs had done this. No, the Turks did it with their knives." Killings continued across Anatolia during 1897, when Sultan Abdul Hamid II declared the Armenian question resolved, having dealt significant damage to the populace and quashing any notion of civil reform. While European powers were outraged, any talk of assistance remained just that, talk. But Sultan Abdul Hamid was wrong. His attempt to quell non-compliance convinced even more young Armenians that the status quo was unbearable and that there was no choice but to fight to protect all that was sacred: family, culture, and their faith. Armenian political groups formed and grew in numbers in response to the massacres, engaging in small-scale skirmishes. During the massacres, the Armenian population of Van had desperately organised a self-defence effort, with the knowledge that any other action would likely result in death. British Vice-Consul Major Williams declared that the Armenian villages had been looted, and that these poor people are suffering considerable hardship. The Armenians everywhere are in a state bordering on panic. These observations were made as a result of the actions of the Hamidiyya, which Major Williams and French representative de France described as having impunity from the Ottoman government. To end the self-defence of Van, the Ottomans offered to guarantee the defenders safe passage to Iran. In exchange, the Ottomans demanded disarmament of the defence, and promised to the French ambassador that the safety of the Armenians in Van would be guaranteed. As if the suffering of the Armenians during the massacres were not enough, the unarmed Armenians were slaughtered and killed during their passage to Iran by the Massacres tribe, under the orders of the Ottoman Turks. Of the 700 unarmed men, only 35 survived, effectively destroying the active youth of Van, and leaving the Armenians in a state of shock. This transgression triggered the Armenian Revolutionary Federation to organise and to show the Hamidiyya that we would not accept our fate without objection. Our people would assemble, train and struggle until our safety was guaranteed. Thus, the AYF organised the Khanasor Expedition. We have looked at the events leading up to the Khanasor Expedition. In the following episode, we'll be looking at what happened during the expedition and the aftermath.
AYF London is named after the Khanasor Expedition, which took place in the year 1897. This year, we are presenting a 3-part series in commemoration of this heroic event. This is part 2. Let's look at the events during the Khanasor Expedition. A witness to the massacres between 1894 and 1896 was Sarkis Vartan Mehrabian, later known as Khanasora Vartan. In his memoirs, he recollects seeing an Armenian village become a helpless mob as the Massacre tribe attacked. 80 men had attacked the village. They had killed 7 Armenians, looted the village and left. What could one do? Pity the Armenians? But then we say to ourselves, they are men like us. Is it their fault that centuries of subjugation have resulted in this condition? It is our obligation to save them. The object of the revolution is to make slaves into men. And it was the same Vartan who would lead the Khanasor expedition. Born in Artsakh, he served in the Russian army before becoming a revolutionary organizer for the Armenians in the Taurus region. In 1896, Vartan, aged 26, was in northern Iran with 253 other Armenian fedais. Vartan was elected as commander-in-chief and Ishkhan as assistant commander, who would later become known as Khanasori Ishkhan for his heroism during the expedition. Prominent fedai Nigor Duman was tasked with planning and organizing the logistics of the expedition. The expedition would organize the 253 Armenian volunteers in northern Iran and lead them to avenge their fallen brethren, thus showing that the Armenian people were ready to affirm their rights against the Massacre tribe. On the eve of July 24th, the Armenian freedom fighters assembled, and Vartan gave an impelling speech, saying, "Let us show the world that we know how to fight for the freedom of our fatherland." The 253 fighters swore allegiance to the cause. And so the force crossed the border and descended onto the Khanasor plains, where the Massacre tribe was camped. As they approached battle, Vartan said, "Men, the time for battle has arrived. Our success is dependent on our discipline and wisdom. Fight until your last breath, but spare the women and children." The battle commenced in the early hours of July 25th, with clashes between the two opposing troops. Despite targeting the chief of the tribe, Sharif Beg, he managed to escape. Soon the hills surrounding the plains thronged with Armenian enemies, and the expeditionary force embarked on the road back to Iran. The Armenian side lost 20 fedais but gained more than just a victory, for they won a spiritual victory. They showed that Armenians would not accept the fate that the Ottomans prescribed to them. We would stand and we would fight for our people and nation.
AYF London is named after the Khansor Expedition, which took place in the year 1897. This year, we are presenting a 3-part series in commemoration of this heroic event. This is part 3. Let's look at the aftermath of the Khanasor Expedition. In the previous video, we discussed the proceedings of the Khansor Expedition between the 25th-27th of July 1897, where a retaliatory expedition was organised against the Massacre tribe to avenge for their ambush of unarmed Armenian volunteers retreating from Van in the previous year. And so, approximately 600 Vanetzilas were avenged. But what does this mean, and why is that in any way significant in the context of the events of the 19th and early 20th centuries? And even more to the point, why is our AYF chapter named after this event? The Khansor Expedition was more than just a military maneuver. It was a symbolic stand where the AYF Fedais took the offensive and achieved a momentous moral victory. After the expedition, the Fedais became heroes, and their stories are retold. The expedition was also an example of revolutionary organisation. In a time where the Armenian revolutionary movement was still in its infancy, the expedition demonstrated organisation and logistics, strategy and courage of the Armenian revolutionaries who brought to life Khanasor Varton's words. Let us show the world that we can fight for the freedom of our fatherland. Whilst today AYF London doesn't intend on embarking on any expeditions of our own, we seek to embody the spirit of Khanasor, which raised the morale of the Armenian people after centuries of subjugation. When times are bleak and hope is scarce, we must remember the courage of the young Fedais who left their families and sacrificed everything for a cause which brought success to their people. We continue to reap the benefits of the work of those heroes. We live as Armenians. We have our Hieronyk and a strong diaspora, which are Pokrik Hieronyks in their own right. In 1897, the Armenians had seemingly little hope in their struggle against the Ottoman Empire. But in those times of desperation, the Fedais of Khanasor sacrificed their lives for what they believed in, for the safety of their people, so that they may be free from oppression. We believe it is every people's right to choose their own fate, and that, if necessary, one must make sacrifices, just as those revolutionaries did in 1897 to achieve that end. We remember the spirit of Khanasor, and we hope through these videos we can embody that spirit together.